We all do it. We search for something, click over to the images, and we just assume that what we're seeing is, well, the whole story. But what if it's not? Today, we're diving into this incredible study that looked into Google's memory and what it decides to show us about one of the most important events in human history. Okay, just for a second, think about this. If you were to open up a new tab right now and search for Holocaust victims, what do you expect to see? You're probably thinking something accurate, right? Something that's comprehensive and respectful. That's what we all assume we're going to get. We really do trust search engines to be this clear, unbiased window into the past. But here's the thing. Every single window has a frame. And in this case, that frame is an algorithm. It's an algorithm that is constantly, quietly making choices about what you see and maybe more importantly, what you don't. And this is a huge deal. Because, let's be honest, for so many of us, Google is our history book now. It's become the new curator of our collective memory. So figuring out how these systems remember the past isn't just an academic question. It's absolutely crucial. Now, the key idea we're going to be talking about is something called aesthetic bias. It sounds a little technical, I know, but the concept is actually pretty simple. It's basically when an algorithm gets stuck in a rut. It finds a certain look or a certain type of image for a topic, and it just shows that style over and over again. And in doing that, it accidentally creates this kind of digital stereotype, pushing all the other parts of the story out of sight. So a team of researchers decided to actually measure this. They conducted this massive audit of thousands and thousands of Google image search results for Holocaust victims. And they did this across 35 different countries to see exactly what kind of picture, what kind of aesthetic bias the algorithm was painting of this history. Before they even started, the researchers had some really clear expectations about what they were going to find. And these weren't just wild guesses. They were based on how our culture, through museums, films, memorials, has spent decades learning how to tell the story in a more thoughtful way. For example, they predicted they would see images that were chosen to build empathy, so more photos of women and children. They also really expected to see the humanity of the victims, pictures that showed their lives before the war, not just endless images of suffering inside the camps, because that's how the best modern memorials do it, right? And that makes total sense. Our collective memory of historical events isn't set in stone. It evolves as we learn how to tell these stories more ethically, more effectively. The real question was, has the algorithm kept up with that evolution? So the stage was set. How did the reality of Google search results stack up against what everyone expected? Well, what the researchers actually found was something else entirely. It was not what anyone would have predicted. The digital reality of this history looks very, very different from the one we've so carefully built in our memorials. All right, so let's tackle that first prediction. Did Google's algorithm focus on the most vulnerable groups, like women and children, to help us connect and feel empathy? The answer was a hard no. In fact, it was the complete opposite. The audit found that Google's results consistently showed more men than women, with women only making up about 40% of the people depicted. So right off the bat, the algorithm's picture was this male-dominated version of victimhood, totally the reverse of what modern human-led curation tries to achieve. And what about showing victims' lives outside of all of the suffering? The data here is, wow, it's even more striking. Over 75%, 3/4 of the images, showed victims explicitly inside the context of the atrocity. So in camps, on trains, being imprisoned. This is the very thing that modern memorials have been trying to move beyond for years. And then, when they looked at emotions, the bias got even weirder. The algorithm seemed to be reinforcing some gender stereotypes, but completely defying others. For example, women were more likely to be shown as either happy or fearful, while men were more often shown as calm or sad. It's just this really complex and kind of contradictory digital portrait. But hold on, because it gets even more complicated. This picture Google is painting, it's not even the same everywhere you look. The algorithm's bias changes, sometimes dramatically, just depending on where in the world you're searching from. I mean, check out this contrast. It is incredible. If you did that search from Italy, nearly every single image, almost 100%, showed victims inside the atrocity. But if you did the exact same search from Israel, less than half of the images showed that same context. You're basically getting two completely different visual histories, all based on your IP address. And here's one of the most bizarre findings of the whole study. You would think, right, that countries where more of the historical victims actually came from would have a more human-focused memory, but the opposite was true. searches from those countries were actually less likely to show images with any people in them at all. So, what does all this add up to? What does it all mean? It means we are watching in real time the birth of a totally new kind of collective memory. And this one isn't being shaped by historians or museum curators, but by lines of code. The big takeaway here is that the algorithm isn't a passive mirror. It's not just reflecting our established culture of memorialization. No, it's an active participant. It is literally assembling its own version of history, with its own unique biases and its own distinct look and feel. So if you had to build a profile of Google's algorithmic victim, it would look like this. It's primarily a man, often older, and almost always shown inside the context of the atrocity. This character stands in stark contrast to the one we've carefully tried to present in our physical memorials, and on top of that, it changes unpredictably from one country to the next. The researchers who did the study, they put it perfectly. They said, the algorithmic gaze of Google produces its own aesthetics of Holocaust victimhood. In other words, Google isn't just getting our history wrong, it's actively creating a whole new version of it. And that leaves us with this enormous, unavoidable question. As these algorithms get more and more powerful, we really have to ask ourselves, if code is now curating our past, who or maybe what is writing the history of tomorrow?